If you're looking for a video that'll help you get set up and prepared for the new school year, you have come to the right place. In this video, I'm going to share with you my top 5 favorite tips that'll help you be organized and ready and feel completely set for the new school year. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Rachel from the Behavior Check-In. I'm a behavior teacher and coach in Florida. I am going into my 9th year of teaching. Every year has been a little bit of different and a little bit crazy, so I've learned some things along the way that have really helped set me up for the school year. So I'm going to share with you my 5 best tips that have helped me. And I know that it can be kind of crazy. Sometimes you don't have a lot of prep. My first year teaching, I was literally hired right before the beginning of the school year, so I had to do everything really quickly. So if this is you, this will help you. It'll give you a starting point on what you need to do to go ahead and get started, so you don't need to be stressed. And the first thing that I really want to share before we get into my tips is you don't have to worry about having everything done all at once. Rome was not built in a day. If you're coming in kind of late and you can't get through all these things, it is okay. Just do what you can. But these things will help you feel more prepared for the school year. They will put systems in place that will keep you more organized so you don't feel like you're constantly playing catch up. All right, my first tip is organizing your space, setting up your classroom. Now, it can be really tempting as a first year teacher. You see a lot of this stuff on social media with all these gorgeous over-the-top classrooms, and you can feel like you have to participate in that. I am here to give you permission that you do not need to have that kind of classroom. They look great, but they're extremely expensive and they take a lot of time and a lot of planning. And especially if you're a first year teacher, you probably won't have all those materials. Like, something that they don't tell you is that a lot of those materials are collected over time. If you were to go out and buy everything for that classroom, you spend thousands of dollars and you don't have the money for that. And that's just going to stress you out. And it is not the most important thing. To be honest, students are going to damage your stuff. They are. I've talked about in other videos, even if they don't do it intentionally, they're just kids, and kids get into stuff, and some are more careful than others, and your things can get broken and then you can get upset. And it's really important to be able to manage yourself and to know your triggers. And honestly, if I spent hours and hours and hours on a handmade bulletin board and a student had a behavior and destroyed it, it'd be really hard for me to be impartial about that. So I don't focus so much on the decor. I want a nice, calm, clean, neat, and organized space, and a space that is student friendly. The big things you want to focus on is having designated areas where students can find things. Do they know where the materials are? Can they access the materials? You really want to foster independence in your classroom no matter what age range it is. This will help you out with your classroom management. So the students know where the paper is. Do they know where the pencils are? Do they know where they can sharpen the pencils? What's your procedure for pencils? Are you going to allow them to get up and sharpen them? Are you going to have a jar? That's the kind of stuff you need to be thinking about. Are you going to have them keep folders and binders in the classroom? Are they going to go in a designated area per class period? Do the students need to know where they are? That's what you need to be thinking about. You need to be thinking about layout. If you look through your IEPs and all the things you have for your students and you have them scattered around on what the preferential seating needs are or their behavior plan state, you can kind of have an idea of how you want to shape your classroom. One thing I like to do is kind of draw out a template beforehand if I'm thinking about where I'm going to place students. If you have a runner, you're going to want to make sure that you position yourself and other staff where their areas are close to the door. These are all things to be thinking about. If you have students with some sensory needs, you might want to include some dividers or spread out things so they have quieter spaces to work. You also want to make sure that you're including a calming corner in your room. This does not have to be anything fancy. Mine is usually a beanbag chair, kind of like a corral area where we have some fidgets and a poster about calming strategies and a timer, those sort of things, just so they know. Sometimes you can do a sign in, sign out based on the ages of your students, and you can keep track of how long they're in the calming corner. Also, be mindful of visuals on your wall. Visuals really should be something that is there and meaningful for the students. When you start the beginning of the school, you want to make sure that you explain the visuals to the students and you teach them how to use them. They're pointless art decor if they don't understand how to use the visuals that you put in place in the room. So make sure when you're putting things in there, they have a place. Of course, it's important for you to have things that make you feel like you're comfortable. You're going to spend a lot of your time in your classroom. So I understand wanting to have an area where you can feel comfortable. That's kind of my teacher area. But I'm also very mindful not to put things that I'm deeply attached to, because once again, things can get lost, stolen, and broken, and we don't want to be sad. But that is the first thing I focus on. And if you don't have a lot of time, don't worry. You can kind of keep it bare bones. Make sure you just have your layout the way that you want it and where kids can find materials. And you can add student art, which is a great thing to do. It really builds community. You can do that throughout the school year. It is not something that you have to have done right at the very beginning. It is okay. My next big thing that you want to get into once you have your space organized is you're going to want to sit down at your caseload and go through your IEPs. I generally print these out. This is just how I manage everything. I go through with a highlighter and I highlight the things that I really need to make sure that I don't forget. And then I utilize my IEP at a glance that you can go ahead and use. I will link it down below. And I go ahead and I list out all the important information. You can either type this in or you can write it in. And then I share this with anybody who is coming in contact with the students, whether that is general education teachers, speech pathologists, OT, bus drivers, paras, anyone who's going to be working with a student and needs to know their accommodations, modifications, and behavior supports, and put all that in place. Also their goals. It's really helpful because if your gen ed teachers know the goal that the student's working on, they can also support you in that way. And sometimes I've had some awesome teachers that have helped pull probes and resources for me, and that makes my job a lot easier. So it's really important to collaborate with them, but making sure you read through the IEPs, you understand everything, and you are setting up your room and setting up everything in accordance to what your students need. Also, while you're going through this, you can look at where they're left off on their baseline. That'll give you an idea when you're trying to gather materials to do baseline assessments on them to know how you want to probe them and work on their IEP goals. The third thing you're going to want to do is set up your schedule. If you are pulling students out or pushing in, or however it's working out for you, if you're self-contained and you have students going out, whatever, scheduling is a big part of a special education teacher's job, and it can be daunting. And one thing to remember is that if you have it set up and it's perfect and it's beautiful, it will change. It always changes. You just got to be flexible. One way that I set up my schedule is I put everything into Google Sheets. I list out my student, I list out their classes, I list out the subjects they're going out for, how many minutes they're going to be out for those, and what I need to pull them in and out for services on. I like to map this all out. I also like to group my students by similar skills that they're working on. For example, if I have students that are coming to me and they are working on decoding, I am not going to be putting them necessarily with my comprehension students because they may be on completely different reading levels and you're targeting different things. So I like to look at what my students are working on. If I'm pulling groups, pull groups that are working on the same skill. I don't really worry about grade level or age. I worry about skill that they're working on, and sometimes behavior, because you have to take into account if certain personalities don't jive, and I try to plan that out. If I have paras working with me, how I'm going to divvy that work out with paras, I put all of that in there. Sometimes I've even written it out on Post-its and move things around in the way that they work best for me. One thing that really helps too is documenting it in my planner and writing it out. I've created a planner that has small group rotations that you can put in there and help write those out. You can make copies, use them as much as you want. The great thing about these as well is you can, if you have an administrator supportive of this, you can use these to have for your administrator when they come and observe you so they can see exactly what you're working on. And this really helps them, especially if they're an administrator who is not familiar with working with students with disabilities and what that might look like in your classroom. So having that written out can be very helpful. It's also very helpful to have that written out and friendly for your paras to see as well. So you can really utilize your paras if you have paras to work with you. If you have, your IEPs at a glance written out, you have your small group rotations written out, they can see these things, and if you have an experienced para, they can help you pull resources, which will help you save time. After I've gone through all of the IEPs and looking at the goals and what they need, that is where I go into number 4. I start pulling things for baseline assessments. So this could be, you could use baseline assessments through your district. Sometimes I know that we've used iReady in the past, or whatever program your school uses. One of the programs I like to use is EasyCBM. It's a great place to get some baseline formative assessments, get an idea of where your students are at. But most districts do provide something, so I would check with them first. But go ahead and get those ready. That is something that you can do probably within the latter part of the first week of school or into the second week of school. One thing that I really like to do at the very beginning is I like to do preference assessments with my students, reinforcement surveys, if you will. I have some listed below that you can use. They're on my TPT site, but they go through and kind of list things about the students, what they like, what they enjoy, things you can use as reinforcement, especially if you're working on behavior plans for students and they have reinforcements as part of the behavior plans. It's just a good way to check in, because a lot of times a kid maybe last year liked Legos and this year maybe they like anime. So you want to be up to date on what is most motivating and reinforcing for them. I sometimes like to do this throughout the year, especially with the littles, because they do change interests a lot. But this can be helpful on what kind of things motivate them, what kind of things they enjoy. Also getting information like their birthday. That way you can sit down and really talk to them and build that relationship. And I know it sounds very cliche, but it is true. Kids do work harder for teachers who take an interest in them and want to get to know them, because it's really hard to be angry and dislike somebody who likes you, and you show a child that you like them by caring about what they care about. So doing these reinforcement surveys is very helpful, and that is one of those things I do the first day or two of school, and I have all that available for me. When I'm writing their IEPs, I can include that. When I'm doing their behavior plans, I can include that. It's all ready to go in there for me. And when I get money from my county to go out and buy reinforcers, I already have it listed out on what they enjoy, so I know what I need to purchase and I'm not just buying things willy-nilly. Oftentimes too, if you get a large selection of a very popular item, you can talk to parents and a lot of them will be willing to donate as well. But that is one thing I like to do right out of the gate, and I think it really does help build the classroom community. Also playing some of those games where you can get to know the kids, but not doing them in a way that's embarrassing. A lot of kids don't like to stand up and talk about themselves, but you can do things like four corners and be like, stand in this corner if you like anime, or stand in this corner if you like Marvel, and get kind of an idea of what the kids like as well, where they don't really necessarily have to stand out and speak or be in a situation where they might be embarrassed. My number 5 tip is not here because it's least important. It's actually a very important step, and even if you're short on time, you want to make sure you touch base on this one, and that is contacting all of your parents. I think it's very important to make that first contact with parents and make it a positive contact. Introduce yourself, invite them to open house, tell them a little bit about you, talk about the best way to communicate with you, whether that's calling you directly at school or if that's using, email or whatever communication system your school has. Talk about some of your expectations. If cell phones are a huge problem, you might want to talk about the cell phone policy that you have in your classroom. If parents have concerns about it, and sometimes you have kids with medical issues or whatever, I've always found it's very helpful to ask what their suggestions would be, because you do want to make sure you have a safe and teaching environment, and you want to make sure you have a teaching environment that's free from disruptions, and cell phones can be disruptive. So a lot of times including parents on their input on what would be helpful for that. A lot of times parents can give you some really valuable information. They know their child best. They might let you know that their kid is maybe slow to warm up. Maybe they start off rough at the beginning of the year, and just be patient that they get better. Or they might let you know that sometimes they don't like to eat breakfast, and so they can get a little hangry, and maybe they'll send in some snacks. All sorts of things. I've learned some really important stuff by having these conversations with parents at the beginning of the year, and it sets things off on the right foot. I pride myself on having very good relationships with my parents, and I think it is because I do this and I genuinely care. I am a parent of a child with an IEP, and I know that a lot of times the first phone call I've gotten from the school has been negative. So I always try to make sure that the first phone call they get is positive. I want to let them know that I do care. I'm excited to teach their child, and that I'm ready for us to work together, and that we're going to have open lines of communication. So really, if you're strapped for time, make sure you get your space organized, make sure you read through your IEPs, and call your parents. I literally would make that your short list. Everything else you could kind of fill in, but those are the things that I would hit to really set off the start of your year well. And of course, I have pre-made a lot of these things, and you can go ahead and get them in my TPT store. Some of them are freebies, and they can really help set you up for a good year. So hopefully these will be helpful for you. Thank you so much for coming to my channel, and remember, be the behavior change you'd like to see, and I will catch you in the next one.